beginning now. All right, welcome to another Stopping Socialism video. I'm Donald Kendal, joined as always by Justin Haskins. So, yeah, as you can see in the banner, Marx despised society's poorest people. So I got the article here, which you can find on stoppingsocialism.com, but it starts off saying, ever since his death, Karl Marx has been hailed as a hero of the downtrodden. But this could not be further from the truth. In reality, Marx and his socialist partner in crime, Friedrich Engels, a co-author of the Communist Manifesto, held those people most in need in society in near total contempt. In fact, the communist duo coined a special phrase to refer to those on the lowest rung of the economic and social ladder, the lumpen proletariat. For those unfamiliar with the 19th century German political lingo, lumpen proletariat can loosely be translated to social scum, the dangerous class, the underclass, ragamuffin, riffraff, or ragged proletariat. Marx and Engels derogatorily called the poorest of the poor, typically out-of-work laborers, the dangerous class and society's absolute worst people. So I think that if you were to bring this up, even to somebody that's not like an ardent supporter of Marx and Marxism, they'd be like, that can't be true. So, yeah. I mean, Justin, enlighten us here.
It seems, on the surface, it seems contradictory, I think, because we don't live in that time. And so it's hard for people to conceptualize, in America especially, what Marx's primary concerns were and who his primary audience was. So you need to imagine you're living in a period of time where it's still sort of the beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution. You have lots and lots of factories, lots and lots of factory workers. Most of the people living in urban places are not earning significantly more money than what they need to pay for basic living expenses. Children and women are working very long hours under very poor conditions. And this is common. This is in meatpacking plants. This is in your textile mills, and on and on and on, right? So there wasn't a significant middle class as we would understand it today. Most people fell into what Marx thought of as the working class, what we would think of as, there really almost is no comparison to it today, because there aren't a lot of people who are working under really poor working conditions anymore in the industrialized world. So you just don't see that kind of thing. But I guess you would think of it more as you're sort of like service industry workers, right? Where they don't earn a lot of money, and they tend to, they might work 40 hours a week, but they don't make that much money, maybe $25,000, $30,000 a year, something like that. And that's kind of just enough to sort of scrape by. I think that was the most people in his era, right? So when he talks about the poor, he's talking about people who are not working. He's talking about totally out of work people. This is before the welfare state that we have now. So when people today complain that there's these people out there who are able-bodied workers who choose not to work and they live off of welfare, and there's a lot of people who complain about that, that really couldn't happen back in his day. Because most people weren't in that category. Most people had to work, right? Yeah. So there are a lot more people today, frankly, who are poorer people, relatively speaking, who just don't work, who could work. That really wasn't something that happened in Marx's day. So he saw poor people who were really poor, people who were destitute, as really just terrible people because they weren't contributing to society. And they weren't part of the working class, and they had very different ideas and goals as the people who were in the factories and who were part of organized labor and all of that. And so Marx, and in many cases, Marx didn't like these people, in part because he saw especially rural poor people as getting in the way of progress. So Marx, above all, wants progress. That's so anyone who was ultra conservative, ultra religious, wanted to keep things the way that they've been for a long time, those people were really bad. And in some cases, especially in rural areas, those people were very poor. So Marx did not necessarily, he wasn't being driven so much by compassion, which is what we tend to think of left-wing groups today. They're driven by compassion. He wasn't driven by compassion. He was driven by progress and revolution. That's what he wanted. And so poorer people, if you were getting in the way of that, then you're part of the problem. And so again, Marxism at its core is really actually not compassionate. It's all about progress, revolution, getting rid of the centralized ownership of the means of production and capitalism and all of that. They want to get rid of private property ownership, and they want to make all of the decisions, all of the property ownership collectively managed and owned. That was what he was primarily focused on. And people who weren't working weren't contributing at all to any of that system. And so he really didn't like them very much. Even though a lot of them were in that position, not necessarily because they were bad people, but just because if you had a disability, if you had a really bad lot in life at that particular point in time, there was no public education in a lot of places. So a lot of people just found themselves in really bad life situations, and it was hard for them to pull themselves out of poverty. But for Marx, he was mostly concerned about the people who were actually working, and just and he felt, because they were working and weren't getting paid fair wages in his mind and were being very mistreated, he was mostly concerned about those people, not the people who didn't have jobs.
Yeah, I mean, there is some just terrible quotes that we got here in this article. It says they belong, talking about the lumpen proletariat. They belong for the most part to the lumpen proletariat, which forms a mass clearly distinguished from the industrial proletariat in all large cities, a recruiting ground for thieves and criminals of all kind living on the refuse of society, people without a fixed line of work. So this kind of like grouped with the other video that we did about him being like a absolute horrible racist. It just kind of like shines a whole light on this guy that he's not trying to pull up everybody in like the people that are forgotten by society. It's like he had a mission to try to get socialism and communism in place, and he didn't care about the people that weren't going to help him do that.
Yeah, that's true. Again, he was not driven by compassion. It's not what drove Marx. It was actually very cold-hearted kind of look at the world. Remember, he saw himself as a scientist. He saw himself as a Darwinian type person who was just looking at what was happening. This was just progress. This is what was necessary. This was a fact of life. It wasn't, for him, we have to do this because there's all these people suffering. It wasn't about that. It was a very cold-hearted scientific look at things. In the Communist Manifesto, this is another quote from the article, I think you see a little bit of this in there. He says, the lumpen proletariat is passive, decaying matter of the lowest layers of the old society, is here and there thrust into the progressive movement by a proletarian revolution. In other words, they don't necessarily want to have the revolution. They're the lowest levels of the old society. They're being pushed into it by the workers. However, in accordance with its whole way of life, it is more likely to sell out to reactionary intrigues. And reactionary means, in this context, wanting to go back to the old ways. And so what he's saying here is these people are stuck in the old society. Sometimes they get dragged into revolutionary movements by the real revolutionaries, the good guys. But then a lot of times they just end up bailing on the revolutionaries and just wanting to go back to the old way things used to be because that's what they're used to. And it's kind of, whenever I see this kind of thing, it reminds me of Barack Obama giving that famous speech in, I think, 2012 in front of all those Democratic donors, where he complained about Republicans clinging to their guns and religion. And it's like, that's Karl Marx. He's sitting there saying, these guys are just clinging to their old ways and they just can't let it go. And if they could just let go, we would have all this progress. And don't they see that it would be better for them? No, because they're too busy clinging to their guns and religion. That's the same kind of idea, same way of looking at the world. So I really think that I'm not saying that Barack Obama held all the same views as Marx.
We heard you.
Yeah. But I do think that it's a similar way of looking at people in rural areas. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, well, if you need something, if you're in the Seattle area and you want to drive all those people in CHOP or Chaz or whatever they're calling it, the autonomous zone, crazy, just show them this. Like, he actually hated you people. So,
Hated them. They're not real. They're not the working. The people who are in Chaz are not. Most of them probably don't have jobs. Most of them are probably not working. Most of them are probably students or people living at mom and dad's house or people who are, living off the welfare state or whatever. Most of them are probably, or they're wealthy people who just want to be part of this movement, but they're not people who are really struggling to get by, working their butts off. Like, those people are at work.
Yeah.
Like, they're at their jobs. They're not in Chaz. So it is funny that these people who call themselves Marxists don't understand Marx really at all.
yeah. So if you need to find this article, just go to stoppingsocialism.com. You can also find it. We share it on our social media pages on Facebook. You just look up Stopping Socialism. You can find more videos like this one on YouTube. Just look up Stopping Socialism TV. We also have an Instagram account, and I just started a Parler account, the alternative to Twitter. So check us out there. Justin, where can people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins, Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you all. We'll talk to you later.